Right, we now come to questions. Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero, Kenny MacAskill.
Question number one, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My department attended the Grangemouth Industrial Just Transition Leadership Forum alongside Scotland Office Ministers and representatives of Unite the Union on 28th of March. We remain in close contact with the Scottish Government and the owner Petroineos. My honourable friend, the Energy Minister, met Scottish Government counterparts and Petroineos management on the 15th of May and raised the importance of working with the unions.
Kenny MacAskill.
Warm words are one thing, tangible support is quite another. Scotland faces the possibility, indeed the probability, if this closes, of being the only major oil-producing nation without a refinery capacity. And yet €700 million has been found by the UK Government to support an Ineos plant in Antwerp, whilst not a penny is available for Grangemouth. Is this to be a Brexit bonus for Belgian workers and a P45 for those Scots at the refinery?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman, and we are working with the Scottish Government and Petroineos to understand all possible options for the future of the refinery. But I would also remind the honourable gentleman that we are the only major party who are backing the North Sea and the billions it brings in each year and the hundreds and thousands of jobs it supports, whilst a new report last week showed that Labour's plan could lose as many as 100,000 jobs in the next 5 years.
Henry Smith.
Question 2, sir.
We are on track to reach net zero by 2050, and we will do so in a way which brings the public with us. We overachieved on our third carbon budget by 15%, and we announced today that we will not be rolling this over because we think we'll be able to overperform on our carbon budget 4 as well.
Henry Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I congratulate this government on being one of the first major economies in the world to set out the ambition for net zero carbon emissions by 2050. What discussions has she had with the Chancellor and the Secretaries of State for Transport with regard to a revenue support mechanism to support sustainable aviation and also ensuring that the feedstock for sustainable aviation fuels takes priority?
I know from my experience that the honourable gentleman is a doughty champion for his local area and for the aviation sector. My department is in regular contact with the Department for Transport and the Treasury on aviation decarbonisation and the important role for sustainable aviation fuel in that transition. On the 25th of April, DfT published a consultation on options for a revenue certainty mechanism alongside details of the SAF mandate, which together will support both decarbonisation and the growth of the sector.
Chair of the Select Committee, Angus MacNeil.
Mr. Speaker, there are many criticisms of the government. I'm sure the criticism the government is aware of, that the government is too slow and is indecisive about giving signals to the market for particular technologies, which means when the government needs to commission new energy, it is stuck with only one option, gas, which, as we know, isn't exactly the way to net zero. What will she be doing to move things a bit quicker and give the market signals as to which energy path the UK will be taking?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman, but I would remind him that we have one of the most remarkable records when it comes to renewable energies in this country. The only country that's built more offshore wind than us is China. We've set out the largest expansion for nuclear, and we are at the forefront of cutting-edge technologies like fusion, like hydrogen and carbon capture.
Then Andrea Jenkyns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Meeting our net zero targets will be extremely difficult and is eye-wateringly expensive, and it's been enforced on my constituents. Does the Minister agree with me that we must be more honest and open about the enormous costs of net zero on the British taxpayer? And will the Government commit to publishing a detailed analysis on these costs in advance of my Westminster Hall debate?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend, and I would say there is a balance to be struck here, which I believe we are striking, which is to make sure that we can make the most of the jobs and the opportunities of the energy transition, when you know that will support up to 480,000 green jobs in 2030. But yes, when it comes to additional costs, we are taking a measured approach because we want to protect households.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the latest progress report, the Climate Change Committee were clear that, and I quote, there continues to be an overly narrow approach to solutions which crucially does not embrace the need to reduce demand for high carbon activities. So when the Secretary of State goes back to the drawing board to revise the government's carbon budget delivery plan, as she now must, will she finally reduce the reliance on unproven techno-fixes and look instead at demand reduction measures, Or, following from the recent embarrassing judgment from the High Court, is she aiming for a hat-trick with her department's climate plan declared unlawful for a third time?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady, and I would find these questions more credible if she would at least once welcome the fact that we're the first country in the G20 to have halved emissions. And when it comes to our progress, I'm very proud of the fact that one of the reasons that we have come so far is because of technological fixes, because of the remarkable progress that this country has made in renewable energy. And that is why we overshot on our first carbon budget, our second and third, and we're on track to overshoot on our fourth as well.
So Secretary of State Ed Miliband.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 weeks ago, the government was found for a second time to be in breach of the law over their climate targets. This failure will mean families across the country paying higher energy bills. The court found, and I quote, "The Secretary of State's conclusion that the proposals and policies will enable the carbon budgets to be met was irrational." Now, last time, they claimed their breach of the law was just on a technicality. What's her dog ate my homework excuse this time?
Well, I thank the right honourable gentleman, but let's be absolutely clear. They did not question the policies we've set out, which we've done in more detail than any of our peers. They did not question the progress which we've already made, which is the first G20 country in the world to halve emissions. And they did not question the ambition of our future targets, which again is amongst the most ambitious of our peers. But if he wants to look at what would smother the transition and private investment in this country, he only needs to look at his own mad, unachievable 2030 target.
Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, with a defence like that, you can see why they've lost in court not just once but twice. And buried in the court documents is the confidential memo which reveals the real reason they lost the case. Because officials were telling ministers they had low or very low confidence that fully half of their carbon reductions would actually be achieved. That's why they were found unlawful. So while she comes to the House each month with her complacent nonsense, the court judgment exposes the truth. The government's way off track. It's abysmally failing to meet the climate emergency and pushing up bills for families as a result.
Well, what I've learned in this role, Mr. Speaker, is that he likes to call people who disagree with him names. But the Tony Blair Institute last week said his plans would raise bills and harm our energy security. Are they flat earthers? He also had an industry report last week which said his plans would see up to 100,000 people lose their jobs. Are those people who are worried climate deniers? When will the right honourable gentleman admit his plans are based on fantasy and ideology and they are the last thing that this country needs?
Question 3, Mr. Speaker.
Who was it? Number 3? Number 3, no.
List West.
Mr. Speaker, every family in Britain is paying the price for the government's failure on energy, with bills through the roof while oil and gas profits have soared. A publicly owned clean energy company would allow us to take back control of our energy, cutting bills and creating jobs across the UK. So why are they letting their ideological stubbornness get in the way of supporting families when they could follow other successful countries in setting up a publicly owned clean energy company like Great British Energy?
I thank the honourable member, but I don't think consumers will thank the honourable member, with the TUC themselves highlighting a potential £61 to £82 billion cost that will either be landed at the taxpayers' doorstep or directly onto consumers' bills. That's nothing to be thanked for.
Rob.
Mr. Speaker, in 1985, just before privatisation, consumers were spending 4.2% of total consumer spending on energy bills. Between 2000 and 2020, that rose to somewhere, or that dropped to somewhere between 2 and 3%. Even last year, after the war in Ukraine, it only hit 3.6%. Does he agree with me, as he's already cited, that actually the suggestion from the honourable member opposite would wallop consumers?
You have to work with businesses to secure investment. In our case, we've secured £300 billion since 2010 in low-carbon technologies as we boost UK energy production, our energy security, and ultimately deliver cheaper bills for consumers.
Kurt McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Why, when it comes to who controls and benefits from our energy system, does the government refuse to put the British people first? As we've heard, foreign-owned firms, whether it's France's EDF or Denmark's Ørsted, reap the rewards from energy that is produced in Britain. As they benefit, it's British people who pay the price, exposed to sky-high energy bills, beholden to volatile international prices. Why is the Minister so opposed to putting power back into the hands of the British people?
Well, there isn't a single country around the world that thinks governments alone can deliver the increased energy security. By working with businesses, we can unlock the private investment to do it. And talking about irrational, imagine a career politician in the Shadow Secretary of State running UK energy. The consumer bills would rocket.
Kerry McCarthy.
I think the Minister is completely missing the point, so I'll use a real-world example. In Bristol, we've set up a 20-year City Leap project with Amoresco and Vattenfall, a partnership between the public and private sector that will help the city cut CO2, bring down bills and deliver green jobs. And actually, the government is piloting similar in York because Bristol has been such a success. But why should it be Vattenfall, a 100% Swedish state-owned firm, rather than the British equivalent, like Labour's GB Energy, that benefits? Why can Swedish taxpayers profit from investing in our future, but the British taxpayers can't?
Politicians with zero business experience are high risk. It wasn't so long ago the Shadow Minister for Energy Security highlighted the success of Robin Hood Energy, backed by Nottingham City Council, delivered a £38 million loss.
Andrew Bridgen.
Question 4, Mr Speaker.
Our pragmatic, proportionate and realistic approach to meeting net zero will capitalise on the opportunities of the low-carbon transition, creating jobs and investment across the UK.
Andrew Bridgen.
Speaker, the costs of net zero is being borne by our hard-pressed constituents at the same time as China increases its carbon dioxide emissions by more than the UK's total emissions every year. Wholesale electricity price is currently £65 a megawatt, but we're paying £102 for fixed offshore wind, offering £246 a megawatt for floating offshore wind, £89 a megawatt for onshore wind and £85 a megawatt for solar. So can the Minister explain whatever happened to plentiful, cheap, renewable energy?
The Honourable Member and I will agree that we must champion the importance of delivering cheaper bills for consumers. This does not have to be a binary choice between tackling climate change and delivering cheaper consumer bills. By investing in a cleaner, more efficient energy system, we can do both.
John Hayes.
Mr Speaker, I refer members to my entry in the Register. The benefits of renewables cannot come at any cost. And in that spirit, I welcome the Secretary of State, in particular, and the Minister's commitment to protecting food security through the additional protections of versatile and productive agricultural land. Will the Minister also affirm the government's determination to protect those areas that are particularly affected by energy infrastructure, pylons, wind and solar, like the Lincolnshire Fens, and the Somerset Levels and the Romney Marsh? Food security matters just as much as energy security in the national interest for the common good.
We are proud to have taken renewables from just 7% under the last Labour government to 47% today, but he makes a powerful point about the need to tackle clustering, and the Secretary of State reiterated clear guidelines and advice to local authorities and planning committees up and down the country to make sure that we safeguard wherever possible our key agricultural lands as part of our commitment on food security.
Jim Farrell.
Mr Speaker. Communities in Westmoreland can't afford for us not to be reducing carbon emissions. I think of communities like Kirkby Stephen, Appleby, Kendal, all of which are listed as energy crisis hotspots. That means that they have below average incomes whilst above average energy prices. There are over 10,000 homes in need of loft insulation in my communities, 6,940 who are needing the same for cavity wall insulation. So I wonder whether he would give resources, the excellent Cumbria Action for Sustainability to meet that need, decrease bills, and then also perhaps revise the rules for Eco4 so that scheme better fits with older homes in rural areas such as ours?
I thank the honourable member, and like on football, we agree on the principles of this, and we are proud as a government to have taken the energy efficient homes from 14% to 50%. Local initiatives can play a key part in that, and I'd be interested to learn more about the project he has highlighted.
Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, decarbonisation is welcome, but it must be achieved in a way that balances the country's other priorities, such as food security. I welcome the statement the Secretary of State made last week about the importance of protecting our best and most versatile farmland. But could the Minister tell me more about how he's going to ensure that we prioritise solar on rooftops instead?
I thank my honourable friend for that, and again, as the government is proud to have delivered an additional 43 gigawatts in renewable energy since 2010 alone, we have actually made changes within planning to make it easier to install rooftop solar panels and also on industrial buildings, and we can thank consumers for leading the way with on average 17,000 households a month last year adding solar panels to their roof.
Question 5, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 5, 7, 8 and 14 together. The price cap has fallen by 60% since the start of the last year, and the government is taking a comprehensive approach to bring down future energy bills for consumers. That includes reforming electricity markets to be more effective, investing across the energy system to make it smarter, and investing in energy efficiency to reduce costs for households.
I thank the Minister for her answer, but I want her to understand that constituents like mine in Romford simply find energy prices becoming completely unaffordable. So the government needs to do more, but also they're very concerned about the cost of net zero. We need to know what that's going to cost them in years to come. Surely the government need to take the British people with them on these policies, because at the moment there's a lot of scepticism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That is certainly one of the aims that we have from this Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. We're incredibly conscious that what we must be doing is making sure we get that energy security, and at the same time making sure that we are helping all of those households and vulnerable households that need our support, including also non-domestic businesses.
Steve Tupwell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Facing the continued impact of Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine and unrest in the Middle East, a significant number of households across Uxbridge and South Ruislip have received help through the government's cost of living support payments. These payments are to be welcomed, but would the Minister agree with me that this important support continues for my constituents, including more information about the help available and how to access it?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I know that the honourable member is an incredible champion for his constituents. And I agree, of course, that the importance that households know where access information on what they may be able to receive is, especially as we are providing £108 billion to households across 2022 to 25. And I recommend that all households visit the Help for Households webpage on gov.uk to see what kind of support they may be entitled to receive.
Simon Baines.
Mr. Speaker, many rural properties on the Welsh borders, including those in Clwyd South and in neighbouring North Shropshire, are not connected to mains gas and therefore use oil and LPG for heating. Many of these residents are unaware of the support that the government is giving to them to help them with their energy bills. Could the Minister outline to the House what support the government is making available to residents who live in these properties?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the honourable member makes an incredibly important point. And of course, we are helping all of those households. And the government has supported around 3 million households using alternative fuels through the £200 alternative fuel payment in the winter 2022 to 23. And since then, of course, energy prices, including alternative fuel costs, have fallen significantly. Despite this, we are committed to supporting all households with a package worth £108 billion across 2022 to 25.
Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've just had some solar panels fitted to my roof, and I'm pleased to report that this is reducing my bills. What more is the government doing to encourage people to produce their own electricity through renewable ways to reduce the pull on the grid and reduce bills?
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'm delighted to hear about the honourable members having the solar panels fitted. And this is an important question that she raises, that the member for East Cornwall, South East Cornwall raises. And she'll be interested to hear that the government is looking at options for facilitating low-cost finance from retail lenders to help households with upfront costs of installation and drive rooftop deployment and energy efficiency measures.
David.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I know of too many cases where people on heat networks are paying extremely high energy bills. Now, I welcome the Department's response to the consultation on heat networks. However, the Energy Act only allows for the Secretary of State to bring in a price cap at their discretion. Some of my constituents are paying energy bills 13 times the energy cap. So will the Minister consider a mandatory price cap to ensure fair prices for heat network customers?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. An honourable lady makes an important point, and of course price cap is an issue for Ofgem. However, I would be more interested clearly to hear about some of the suggestions, and I'm always happy to have a meeting on that particular subject.
Drew Hendry.
Speaker, fuel and extreme fuel poverty across the Highlands and Islands is higher than anywhere else in the UK. Yet families there are forced to pay the highest electricity standing charges in the UK, 50% more than London, for example. And that's despite being a region that exports in excess of 6 times the renewable electricity that it exports 6 times the renewable electricity it generates. When will the government introduce a Highland energy rebate to ensure fairness for people across the Highlands and Islands?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And the honourable gentleman will know that we have had many ongoing conversations around this subject. And also, one of the things that we have been looking at, and certainly the Secretary of State and myself have been doing, is talking to Ofgem to really make sure that they're looking at the standing charges, which had led for the call for import, which has recently had over 30,000 responses.
Samuel Roberts.
With my constituent Beverly Scott, who has cancer, suffered from poor work carried out under the Eco4 scheme, the government scheme. This included leaving her without heating and damage to her internet. She eventually had to go to the small claims court to get redress for shoddy work, and I know of other people who've had to follow the same route. Now, when provider companies, enabled by government strategy, leave vulnerable householders with no option but going to court, does the Minister not agree that there should be better oversight and a simpler remedy for people like Beverly Scott?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And the honourable lady makes an incredibly important point. And of course, one of the things that we are determined to do is make sure that those installations are carried out in a correct manner. And we have in fact had new regulations that are in place to make sure that that happens going forward.
Christine Jardine.
Mr Speaker, the Minister will know, as I have discussed this with her before, that I am also concerned about the level of standing charges in my constituency of Edinburgh West. And one of the problems that comes through is that people with prepayment meters often find that when they go to add the payment, that the standing charges wipe everything out. Is there a way that the government can look at, with Ofgem, providing more support for those on prepayment meters to avoid this problem?
Abolish the charges.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And the honourable lady, again, we have had many conversations around this. And one of the things that we have done is making sure that those people who are on prepayment meters are not unfairly penalised for this.
We now come to Shadow Minister Dr Alan Whitehead.
The Minister has repeatedly said today, and her colleagues, that they care about cutting bills for families. But a recent report from the Resolution Foundation found that the poorest households in our country have been hit 6 times harder than the richest by the onshore wind ban. In terms of the share of their household income, they have been forced to pay an additional electricity bills as a result of the total failure to build onshore wind in England. So how on earth can they continue to sit there claiming that they stand up for working families when they continue to block the cheapest form of clean energy there is that could cut bills for families that desperately need help? And will the Secretary of State, before she leaves office, pledge to put this right so that onshore can really be built again and customers can save money on their future bills?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And that just is absolutely not the case. We are proud. We stand here incredibly proudly as a Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, knowing that we have made a commitment. We're doing more than has ever been done on renewables, done more than ever on offshore wind, and actually we've done more to help people with all of their affordability bills.
So Desmond Sway.
Number 6, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund is upgrading a significant amount of the social housing stock currently below EPC up to that standard. We have already committed over £1 billion of government funding, with a further £1.25 billion already committed 2025 to 2028.
Sir Desmond.
By how much has she increased the level of insulation, and what significance does she attach to it?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for his brevity, as always. The amount of social housing that is well insulated has gone up from just 24% in 2010 to 70% today. And for housing overall, we have gone from just 14% in 2010 to 50% today.
Sir Ben Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome through her the admission by the Secretary of State last week, finally, that this flagship scheme is failing, although the words she used were it has been a bit slow on the uptake. They have had 14 years to devise the most cost-effective way of reducing people's bills, carbon emissions, making homes warmer and creating good, new, skilled jobs. When will we have a scheme that actually works?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I respectfully say to the Honourable Gentleman that we do have schemes that are working, and also remind that the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero has launched a £1 billion Great British Insulation Scheme, which aims to upgrade around 300,000 of the country's least energy-efficient homes.
SNP spokesperson Dave Dougal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Scottish Government is working at pace to replace polluting heating systems and improve energy efficiency in Scotland's building stock, with £1.8 billion being invested in this parliamentary session towards heat and energy efficiency measures and £600 towards new affordable housing. And with the Climate Change Committee stating that the Scottish Government's Heat in Buildings Bill could become the template for the UK, helping Scotland to decarbonise faster than anywhere else in the UK, would the Minister like to come to visit the Scottish Government in Edinburgh? I can arrange this for her so that she can see climate leadership in action.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, I just want to reiterate again that energy efficiency is incredibly important to us on this side of the House. It's incredibly important to government. Of course, I would be happy to come on a visit to Edinburgh, and indeed, I have already visited there.
Dave Dougal.
A slightly more enthusiasm might have been welcome by people living in England in cold and draughty houses, but nevertheless, it's not simply our extensive ambition that leaves the UK behind in Scotland, but our delivery too. Since 2007, and they might want to listen to this, Mr. Speaker, since 2007 per person, the SNP have built 40% more homes than Tory England and 70% more homes than Labour Wales, ensured 65% of the Scottish social rent sector is energy efficiency C or above, and insulation levels in Scotland are way higher than in England. So it's clear that the UK Government has materially failed to abate the demand side of the energy system to any meaningful extent. What will the Minister do to atone for this glaring betrayal of bill payers in the few weeks they have left in office?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And unlike the gentleman opposite, we haven't abandoned our targets. And there has been good progress in improving the efficiency of households. And in fact, around half our homes, 48% in England, have now reached the government's 2035 target of achieving EPC C levels, up from 14% in 2010.
Abdul Khan.
Question 9, Mr. Speaker.
Britain is the first major economy to halve emissions whilst growing the economy by 80%. We have more ambitious targets for 2030 than the EU, with the UK aiming for a 68% reduction in emissions to their 55%. We've overachieved on all carbon budgets to date and remain on track for the next.
Abdul Khan.
At COP28, the UK, alongside nearly 200 countries, agreed to the transition away from fossil fuels. Since then, the government has recklessly granted new oil and gas licenses and pushed legislation through this House to max out the North Sea fossil fuels. So will the Minister meet the 50 cross-party parliamentarians who last week signed a letter urging the government to show climate leadership and join the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, which aims to phase out oil and gas production ahead of COP29?
I thank the honourable member for raising the importance of this, and that's why we're proud that we've already taken 70% out of the oil and gas sector.
Lorraine Thomas.
Hydro-treated vegetable oil is a really good alternative to ripping out heating systems that already exist in rural homes. We've heard today about the cost to rural homes as we try and address the impact of using less fossil fuels. Will the government really get behind the opportunity for HVO in rural communities to actually give householders their chance to contribute to reducing harmful emissions in their homes?
I thank my honourable friend who's always championed his local constituents to make sure they get value for money. We must explore all potential options, local or national, to see the best way to deliver both energy security and lower bills in the future.
Tommy Shepherd.
Question 10, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The evaluation of our energy support schemes will conclude in summer 2025. To ensure their bills were fair, Supported Heat Network customers received an average of £1,200 via the Energy Discount Scheme, which closed last month.
Tommy Shepherd.
Well, that's rather disappointing, Mr. Speaker. I have more than 100 constituents in the Greendykes area of Edinburgh who get their heating and hot water from a communal district heating scheme. The government has refused to offer them price protection, saying instead it should be regulated by the business regulation scheme. But that ended on the 31st of March, leaving these people with no protection at all and facing increases of up to 500% in their energy bills. Mr. Speaker, my constituents want to know, why did the government wait until the business scheme finished before considering alternative protection for these domestic customers? Why did it take a year to get them protected, and what compensation are they going to offer in the meantime?
Well, obviously, I hear the passion that he stands up for his constituents, and rightly so, given the circumstances that they find themselves in. And indeed, we are introducing regulations to give Ofgem powers to investigate and intervene where prices for consumers appear to be unfair, and to make sure all heat network consumers receive a high-quality service from their providers. I'm happy to meet him to discuss this in greater detail in due course.
Richard Fuller.
Speaker, district heating networks are a good innovation, and the government has a very good record of stimulating these projects around the country. But the honourable member opposite is right to say that the regulation in this area does need looking at. So can I reassert what he has said and ask the Minister to carefully come forward with protections that he can ensure that if we look for shared heating solutions, consumers of those networks are not at a disadvantage compared to people pay their bills directly?
I'm very pleased to give that assurance to my honourable friend. As I said, we are talking to Ofgem right now about introducing regulations to make it much fairer and indeed simpler, and indeed to ensure that consumers who are on heat networks get the service that they in fact deserve.
Michael Shanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Number 11, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The planning decision is devolved to the Scottish Government. Officials will work together to resolve cross-border matters. The UK Government is committed to effective cooperation with the Scottish Government on this and indeed other issues, supporting our shared energy security and net zero objectives.
Michael Shanks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for the answer and the promise to work together as officials? But the Minister will be aware that this is a 4.1 gigawatt renewables project that could be the largest offshore wind farm in the world, delivering over £8 billion to the UK economy. And the only reason that it's not eligible for this year's Contract of a Difference auction is the Scottish Government's failure to make a decision on consent for the project. So, has the Minister or anyone in his department spoken to Scottish ministers regarding the impact of this decision, both to the impact on investment in our economy and to make sure that the consenting for offshore wind process is sped up so we don't miss out on tens of billions of investment and thousands of jobs that a project like this would deliver?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and obviously, as I said, the UK Government works very closely and collaboratively with the Scottish Government on a whole host of areas, especially on energy security and net zero. But because this is a live planning issue, and whether it is in the jurisdiction of Westminster or indeed Holyrood, we do not comment on live planning cases given their quasi-judicial status.
Blackman.
12, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The Civil Nuclear Roadmap reconfirmed the government's ambition to deploy up to 24 gigawatts of nuclear power by 2050. The roadmap sets out plans to make investment decisions concerning 3 to 7 gigawatts every 5 years between 2030 and 2044.
Bob Blackman.
Mr Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for that answer. Clearly it's important to have a mixed economy in terms of energy production, and nuclear has to play its part. What action is my honourable friend taking to make sure that the development of small modular nuclear reactors is enhanced and brought forward, because that's the fastest way to get nuclear energy into our network?
I completely agree with my honourable friend. The small modular reactor technology selection process, the fastest of its kind in the world, I might add, continues to progress quickly. It is currently in the tender phase, allowing vendors to bid for potentially multi-billion-pound technology development contracts. Companies will have until June to submit their tender responses, at which point Great British Energy will evaluate bids and negotiate final contracts. The aim is to announce successful bids later this year.
Jim Shannon. Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Minister is always quick and keen to respond to ensure that all parts of this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland can have advantages. So when it comes to the technology that he's referred to the Honourable Gentleman's question, what and when will Northern Ireland get the same advantage?
Well, as the honourable gentleman knows, I am keen to ensure that every part of our great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland benefits from the expansion of nuclear power and the benefits that it can bring, not only in terms of our net zero objectives, but also to the economies in which these small modular reactors will be built. And I would be happy to meet with him at any time to explore what benefits can be accrued in Northern Ireland from the expansion of our nuclear capacity here in the UK.
Andrea.
Question 13, please, Mr Speaker.
The government is immensely proud of its record on climate change, cutting emissions faster than any other G20 country over the last decade. The judgment contains no criticism of our detailed plans, nor the policies themselves, which will keep the UK on track to meet net zero by 2050.
Mr Speaker, the party opposite has a legal and moral duty to meet our carbon emissions targets. Failure to do so will consign my generation and generations after mine to a future of climate catastrophe. So it is beyond a joke that the government's carbon budget delivery plan has now been ruled unlawful, not just once, but twice. When will the Minister tell the flat earthers sitting behind him to stop trying to make net zero a culture war issue and instead actually deliver a transition that both meets our climate obligations and improves people's living standards?
Our carbon budget delivery plan has over 300 detailed policies. We are recognised as leading internationally, having cut emissions already by half, the first major economy to do so, with a further ambitious target to get to 68% by 2030 compared to just 55% of the Shadow Secretary of State's beloved EU.
Question 15, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The energy suppliers are responsible for paying compensation. They have carried out 150,000 assessments so far, with 2,500 customers due compensation. 1,502 payments have been made, with more than 1,000 planned.
Dan Carlton.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Despite the Energy Ombudsman ruling that one of my constituents should not have been placed on a prepayment meter due to her vulnerabilities, she hasn't been awarded a penny of compensation under the scheme. And as the Minister has just outlined, only 1,500 people have had any compensation awarded at all from 150,000. That's 1%. So why is this number so small? Could it be perhaps that it's the energy suppliers themselves, overseen by Ofgem, deciding who's entitled to these payments, both of whom sat there idly as agents forced their way into people's homes to install the prepayment meters in the first place?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question and also for the opportunity for clarity. Clearly, prepayment meter forced installation is unacceptable, and as a government we have done everything we can to counteract that. However, I just wanted to reiterate that the 150,000 were investigations that were carried out, and out of that 2,500 were the amount where compensation was due, and so therefore instead of 1%, the actual figure that's compensation is 60%.
Question 16, please, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Fuel poverty is devolved. Statistics for England estimate there's 3.7 million households in fuel poverty in 2023 and over 1.5 million fewer than in 2010.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The best way to cut fuel poverty is through a nationwide home upgrade scheme, but the Secretary of State seems unaware of the reality when it comes to home upgrades. Her own officials said in recent documents given to the High Court that progress to decarbonise the UK's building stock has been slow, policy gaps remain, government is lagging behind. Why won't she admit in public what our department tells her in private?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And this government is committed to making sure that we get not only energy efficiency, but also that we are supporting people with their energy bills.
Thank you, Ford.
Mr Speaker, thanks to government grants in my Chelmsford constituency, the social housing provider CHP has made some great investments in social housing to help the energy efficiency, reduce the bills and lower fuel poverty. But they'd like to go further, so will the Minister discuss with me ways in which we can help share the benefits of those savings, so some of the savings can be invested in improving the energy efficiency and lowering the bills in even more homes?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And the Honourable Lady makes an incredibly important point that energy efficiency is really important in order to lower bills, which is why, of course, we have the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which supports local authorities and housing associations to upgrade to social housing stock currently below EPC level C.
Mr Mathers.
Question number 17, please, Mr Speaker.
As a department, our ministerial team meet regularly with industry, for example, through the Hydrogen Investor Forum, Offshore Wind Industry Council, Solar Task Force, Green Jobs Delivery Group and Cross-Cutting Net Zero Council.
Justin Mathers.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last week, Stellantis, the owners of the Vauxhall car plant in Ellesmere Port, announced they were going to be importing electric vehicles, despite the fact that we're producing some great electric vans in Ellesmere Port and want to move on to producing cars there as well. Does the Minister think over the long term reaching our net zero targets through the import of cheaper Chinese vehicles is going to be a good thing or a bad thing for the UK car industry?
Well, it's a very important point that is raised, and one of the opposition's main pledges to fully decarbonise the grid by 2030 could only be done by opening the floodgates to cheap Chinese imports, the exact thing that the honourable member is opposed to.
It's great.
Speaker, many of the unwelcome large-scale solar applications, such as Limedown in my own constituency, are funded by offshore companies like Macquarie, most famous for letting Thames water fall to pieces. What meetings has the Minister had with these speculative investors to make sure that people who are actually building solar farms will be there in 40 years to make sure that they're then removed?
My honourable friend, a neighbouring constituent MP, raises an important point around speculative development, which is as part of our speeding up of the grid queue, where we've got somewhere in the region of 700 gigawatts of power capacity coming forward. We wish to prioritise shovel-ready schemes, not speculative schemes.
Right, we come to topicals. Liz Twist.
Topical one, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker, since I was last at the dispatch box, we've been building up Britain's energy security. We've taken the next step in the biggest expansion of nuclear in 70 years, making Britain a producer of advanced nuclear fuel, pushing Putin out of the global energy market. Just today, we've seen Rolls-Royce have announced they'll be investing millions of pounds and bringing new jobs to Sheffield to manufacture SMRs. We've overachieved on Carbon Budget 3, keeping us on track to reach net zero and building on our proud record of being the first major economy to halve emissions. And to help cut energy costs, we've invested over £500 million to help cut bills for schools and hospitals and are taking our next steps on Pop Punch, protecting motorists from unfair prices.
Mr West.
Mr Speaker, latest figures prepared by National Energy Action show that there are still 1,875 homes in my constituency with legacy prepayment meters. What action is the government taking to remove these costly burdens on families?
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. When it comes to prepayment meters, something that I've looked at in my career for a long time, one of the things I'm proudest that we've done is taken out the premium that people on prepayment meters were paying.
Yep. Dr James Davies.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I welcome Ofgem's ongoing review of standing charges within electricity bills. In the North Wales and Merseyside region, the standing charge is currently 67.04 pence per day, compared to an average of 60.10 pence across the UK. So will the Minister commit to coming back in front of the House to provide further comment on this geographical variation once Ofgem has published the findings of its review?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And the honourable member makes an incredibly important point, and he's right to pick up on this matter. And I can reassure him that I have encouraged and pushed Ofgem to do more on this particular issue. Electricity standing charges include network costs, which reflect the cost of maintaining and upgrading the transmission and distribution networks across the country. And of course, I'm happy to meet him further on this particular subject.
Shadow Minister Sarah Jones.
The National Infrastructure Commission said the government has reversed some progress on net zero. The Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead said the government's rollback on net zero has put off investors, and a member of the Climate Change Committee said we are not ready at all for the impact of extreme weather on our national security. Mad, bad and dangerous. Will the Secretary of State finally back Great British Energy and the National Wealth Fund instead of lurching from crisis to crisis, not having a plan and selling out Britain?
We absolutely won't be backing putting the Shadow Secretary of State in charge of a UK British energy company piling misery onto consumer bills. What we have done is unlock £300 billion of public and private investment in low-carbon technology since 2010, with plans for £100 billion more by 2030, and last year alone saw £60 billion investment, up a staggering 71% on the previous year.
Rachel McLean.
Mr Speaker, I know the Secretary of State understands the importance of safeguarding good agricultural land for food production. So can she update my constituents in Inkborough and Stock Green on what more she's doing to ensure that solar panels are placed on car parks and warehouse rooftops, of which we have ample in my constituency?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that question, and she's absolutely right. We do need to protect the best and most versatile agricultural land in this country. Unlike the party opposite, we do respect the views of communities up and down this country, and we will not countenance the industrialisation of our countryside. However, solar power remains very important. We are committed to our 70 gigawatt target, and in the forthcoming publication of our solar roadmap, we will be setting out exactly how we will be incentivising the development of rooftop solar and indeed development on brownfield and other sites.
Mr Speaker, billions of pounds of private investment is queuing up to invest in the green industries of the future. But under this government, that has flowed abroad. The UK is now 8th out of 8 major countries in Energy UK's projections for renewable investment up to 2030. How have they allowed this to happen?
That's simply not the case. We're internationally leading. Last year alone, £60 billion worth of funding for low-carbon technology, up 71% on the previous year. This is why other countries turn to the expertise of our businesses, our supply chain, and us leading with our policy frameworks.
Theresa Villiers.
The switch to electric cars and vans is crucial for improving air quality and reaching net zero. So will the government update us on action being taken to deliver charging points in the right places in consultation with residents?
I thank my honourable friend for this important point. The government has invested in the Faraday Battery Challenge, a £541 million programme to support research, development and scale-up of world-leading battery technology in the UK. And since 2022, all new homes and homes undergoing major renovation in England have been required to have a charge point installed. And that is why we welcome the year-on-year 49% increase on charge points.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can the Minister confirm whether the government has dropped its commitment to consult on a social energy tariff? And if not, can we have an update on progress, given that a social energy tariff would lift 2.2 million households out of poverty?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And of course, a social tariff means lots of different things to different people. But really what it ultimately means is making sure that we are supporting all of those vulnerable people. And you will be, the honourable member will be aware that we are doing many things in this government to support people, from the warm home discount to the cost of living payment, which is £900, to a variety of other measures.
Mark Eastwood.
Speaker, whilst it's important that we support renewable energy sources, would the Minister agree with me that solar panels should go on rooftops and not farmland?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. As he has heard me say already today, solar power is of course important, and we remain committed to our 70 gigawatt target. However, food security is as important as energy security when it comes to national security, and that is why we are protecting the best and most versatile farmland in the United Kingdom, and unlike the party opposite, respecting the views of communities up and down the country, ensuring our countryside is not industrialised, and incentivising companies, individuals and organisations to invest on rooftop solar and solar indeed on brownfield sites and not greenfield sites.
Carlton. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister think that a regulator that allows the poorest to pay the highest bills and has overseen the doubling of energy bills since 2021 and overseen the collapse of 30 energy companies in the same period is really fit for purpose?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Clearly, in terms of looking at lots of make-up in terms of the price cap, which is looking at how we ensure that energy businesses are able to survive, and that, of course, is also a matter for Ofgem.
Christopher Clarkson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My constituency is home to Scanmore, one of the largest onshore wind farms in Europe. But, of course, the North West also has amazing potential for offshore wind, such as the Morgan and Morecambe developments off the coast of Lancashire. But these, of course, require huge amounts of infrastructure to be realised, notwithstanding the reassurances my right honourable friend has previously given about ensuring that community consent is part of any such project. Will she ensure that any infrastructure is also based on community consent?
My honourable friend raises an important point. Absolutely, and that is part of our forward planning to make sure we can unlock the huge potential in every region in our United Kingdom.
Richard Ford.
Thank you. Under Ofgem's price cap that has just come into effect, people with the most poorly insulated rural homes can expect to pay an additional £340 on their annual energy bills. Will the Minister expand insulation schemes, particularly for people living in rural areas?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are a few things within this question. And of course, one of the most important things is looking at the standing charges, how they're made up, and which is why we have asked for encouraged Ofgem to ask for the call for input. But of course, insulation schemes are really incredibly important as well, which is why the government is committed to supporting many insulation schemes.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Now, hydrogen is the only viable alternative to natural gas for a balanced, reactive and carbon-zero electricity grid. Now, the UK has 32 gas power plants, all of which can be cheaply and easily retrofitted to burn hydrogen instead of natural gas. What is her department doing to encourage this type of retrofitting to help develop technologies to decarbonise electricity generation and take advantage of the so many benefits of hydrogen?
I thank my honourable friend for that rather surprising question on hydrogen. Government recognises the value of hydrogen in supporting a decarbonised and secure power system. We intend to publish soon our response to the December 2023 Hydrogen to Power Market Intervention consultation, and we will soon legislate for decarbonisation readiness requirements that new build or substantially refurbishing combustion power plants be built net zero ready.
Marion Fellers.
Mr. Speaker, in the last 12 months, 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 young households in energy debt have turned to moneylenders, illegal moneylenders, to help pay for bills and everyday essentials. The End Fuel Poverty Coalition stated that crisis could potentially mean that young households spend years at the mercy of these loan sharks. So what assessment has the Minister made of working with Ofgem and energy suppliers to introduce support to alleviate this record-high energy debt?
The honourable member makes an incredibly important point, and also I have had many conversations with the honourable member on this. I would also like to give my reassurance that I do meet Ofgem on a very regular basis to discuss this, as it is an issue very close to my heart, which is why the call for the input. And earlier this week, for reassurance, Mr. Speaker, I did meet with energy suppliers, and I also have ongoing meetings with the Citizens Advice Bureau and other stakeholders.
Mr. Jeremy Wright.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Like others, can I welcome what the government's already done to extend permitted development rights on rooftop solar and car park canopies. But can I encourage my honourable friend not just to allow particularly car park canopies, but to work with others in government in planning and other responsibilities to encourage them, there are considerable benefits to them, and particularly in hotter summers.
Thanks, honourable learned friend, for that question. And can I urge him to bide his time and have patience, because in the next few weeks we will be publishing our solar roadmap, and that will be expanding on exactly how we will be working with other government departments and indeed industry to ensure that we do take advantage of the huge advantages that we have when it comes to the amount of rooftops available for the deployment of solar capacity across the UK.
Campbell.
There has indeed been a significant increase in domestic insulation schemes in recent years, but will you agree to increase the degree of conversations with devolved institutions so that we can see a genuinely nationwide revival of insulation schemes that can singularly do more to reduce the dependency on high energy costs for those maximum people at risk in social housing and elsewhere?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And clearly, energy efficiency is incredibly important, and therefore making sure that we get the correct installation schemes are incredibly important. And I would like to give the honourable gentleman my assurance that we are doing everything we can to ensure that those installations take place.
Crawley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In light of the funding for Flow Mist recently being awarded to Wales, can the Minister please advise me on when AMP in Falmouth, which was supposed to be a vital part of the supply chain for the only successful project in the AR4, be put on the reserve list? The Minister has promised to meet with me on several occasions. Can I ask that we expedite this as quickly as possible?
Absolutely. I'd be delighted to meet my honourable friend to discuss this. Indeed, I am determined to ensure that those ports that were not successful through the Flow Mist process are able to take advantage of the huge increase that we expect to see in the deployment of floating offshore wind capacity off the coast of the United Kingdom. And I'd be happy to meet her and indeed any other Member of Parliament who represents a port that was not successful through the Flow Mist procedure to discuss how we can move this forward.
Community energy can deliver so many renewable energy products and save on energy bills. Last year in Bath, a community energy project on rooftop solar on schools saved schools £130,000. When will the government remove the barriers to community energy?
As a result of the Energy Act just last year, we actually launched a consultation and indeed a multi-million-pound fund to help support the expansion of community energy across the United Kingdom. It would be great to have the Liberal Democrats' support in that effort, as this party, this government, is doing to ensure that the benefits of community energy are felt up and down the length and breadth of this country.
So, Ian Jenkyns-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of my right honourable friend, as we go to net zero, surely we also need to retain our sense of human rights. And we know that in Xinjiang, where the polysilicon is mostly mined, they mine it using slave labour. At what extent are we prepared to say it's net zero trumps slave labour, and are we checking on slave labour products in those arrays?
I can assure my right honourable friend that we indeed are ensuring that the extent that slave labour is used is kept very much at a minimum, if at all, in the supply chain of any of the components coming to advance ourselves towards net zero moving forward. The solar roadmap, as already referenced this morning, will be setting out in greater detail how government will work with industry to ensure that there is no slave labour components to any of the parts that we are importing to develop our renewable technology moving forward.
Mr. Speaker, my constituent from Govan Hill is being passed from backwards and forwards between Utilita and the DWP. He receives income-related ESA. He should be entitled to the warm home discount, but neither Utilita nor the DWP are able to give him the money that he's entitled to. He applied in September last year. Will the Minister intervene and make sure he gets the money that he's due?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if I could, I would encourage the honourable member to write to me on this particular issue, and I'll look into it.
Mr. Speaker, can I put on record my heartfelt thanks to the Secretary of State and the Minister for Renewables for the action you took last week to put at the heart of local planning decisions food security alongside renewable energy. But can I ask what the government is doing to make sure that all councils immediately enact this, because it is both for local councils and for government, and also whether existing soil assessments will stand for NSIPs or whether they will be redone?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for her question and for her kind words. I am pleased to confirm to the House that my honourable friend, the member for North East Derbyshire, Minister Andrea, has written to all local authorities to draw their attention to the statement last week, which underlined our robust policy on solar farms on our best and most versatile agricultural land. Local planners should know that this government is serious about solar being put in the right places and not on the best and most versatile agricultural land.
Chair of the Committee, Angus MacNeil.
Tapla Vidisha, Mr Speaker. Zonal pricing has the potential to lower bills for households from Sussex to Shetland, from Stonehaven into the great town of Stornoway. Of course, there are vested interests who will be concerned, such as energy generating companies who are benefiting from the constraint payments raised from customer bills. So what is the Government doing to stimulate debate and knowledge about zonal pricing?
I thank the honourable member. It was a pleasure as my return as a Minister to attend his Select Committee, which he chairs so well. This is part of stage 2 of our wider consultation as part of our REMA review, and we take on board his and his wider committee's constructive suggestions in that meeting.
Simon Fell.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. A key tool in our arsenal against climate change has got to be sequestering carbon. So it was a pleasure last week to see the Morecambe Bay Net Zero Peak Cluster Vision launched, which could decarbonise 40% of our cement and lime industries, securing a gigaton of carbon under Morecambe Bay. Could I encourage my honourable friend to meet with me to discuss this project further?
I would be delighted to meet with my honourable friend at any time and happy to discuss this and indeed any other matter relating to the subject.
Sir John Hayes, final.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Now that the Government has recognised the importance of versatile and productive agricultural land in respect of solar, will they recognise too the threat of a monstrous string of pylons stretching right down the east coast of England? We either care about our green pleasant land or we don't, for as Keats understood, truth is beauty and beauty truth.
My honourable friend will know that we value taking communities with us and working with them, and I'm having a number of meetings on this very subject to look at new technologies to see what additional options there could be to support local communities as we rapidly upgrade our national grid network.
Okay. That completes questions. We'll let the front bench change over.